Kevin Feige updates fans on the MCU's future, including the return of an old villain. Marvel maestro Kevin Feige is usually pretty tight-lipped when it comes to the future of the decade-spanning Marvel Cinematic Universe. However, with Avengers Endgame within reach of becoming the biggest film of all time, we guess Feige was feeling a little generous, because on Wednesday, for the first time, he jumped on Reddit for an AMA, Ask Me Anything, kind of almost anything. Because, as expected, there were a lot of questions that the season producer politely declined. So sorry to all y'all who thought we were getting a definitive answer about the X-Men in the MCU or when we'll finally see Seth Green in a standalone Howard the Duck movie. But there were plenty of juicy tidbits Feige was happy to answer, and we're breaking down some of the better bits as well as one big drop that we think ties into the future of the MCU. So what were some of these tiny nuggets, you ask? How about the fact that while a lot of the original Avengers have wrapped up their arcs, the Hulk still has some interesting places to go? According to Feige, he and Mark Ruffalo had a sit-down a few years ago to discuss how they'd both like to see the character develop. And while we have seen some of that play out in Thor Ragnarok and Avengers Endgame, he says we'll see even more of it in Phase 4. He also revealed that he loves seeing old characters that the fan base may have forgotten about pop back up in unexpected places, like General Thunderbolt Ross disappearing for about a dozen films, then returning in Civil War, or Harley, Tony Stark's pre-Peter Parker protege from Iron Man 3 showing up at his funeral at the end of Endgame. Of course, he didn't mention any specific characters we might see make a comeback, except for one. Or more accurately, he mentioned we're finally going to see a character we've heard mentioned before but have never actually seen. If you can think back all the way to the summer of 2013, you might remember there was a little controversy over the handling of the iconic Iron Man villain, the Mandarin. In the comics, the Mandarin is a diabolical madman who is also a skilled martial artist and a genius scientist who crafts 10 rings of power from a crashed alien ship. In fact, we get an homage to the Mandarin all the way back in the very first Iron Man movie, as the group that kidnapped Tony and propelled him to create his Mach 1 Iron Man suit was called the 10 Rings.
Tony Stark was able to build this in a cave with a box of scraps.
Nonetheless, fans were in a little bit of an uproar when writer-director Shane Black treated the Mandarin as a little bit of a joke, casting Academy Award-winning actor Ben Kingsley in the role, only to reveal the character was nothing more than a part being played by a perpetually drunk community theater performer named Trevor Slattery. And while Kingsley was undoubtedly hilarious in the movie, a lot of viewers didn't like to see such a beloved bad guy turned into a punchline. Anyway, a few months later, Marvel released the one-shot short film on the Thor: The Dark World home release, both as an attempt to course-correct the Mandarin and an attempt to give people a reason to buy Thor: The Dark World. In the short, we catch up with Trevor Slattery in prison and find out that the Mandarin was real all along and was none too happy about this doofus impersonating him on a worldwide stage. It ends with Trevor getting the ominous news that the Mandarin will be breaking him out of jail soon so that the two of them can have a little sit-down to discuss the consequences of identity theft. Ooh. He's gonna get his face cut off. So the point is the Mandarin does exist in his OG big bad form somewhere in the MCU. And one intrepid Redditor asked Feige if we could ever expect to see him or the 10 Rings on screen in any capacity, to which Feige responded with a short and simple, yes. Whoa! You don't usually expect that kind of directness from Feige, but there it is, clear as day, a big ol' emphatic yes. Of course, with Tony Stark gone, the big question now is, how will one of Iron Man's most famous villains fit into the MCU without Iron Man? Well, we have an idea. It seems pretty likely that one of the Marvel Phase 4 movies on the horizon is Shang-Chi, the Master of Kung Fu, a martial arts-based superhero from the 70s. And while the character is pretty well known, his rogues gallery isn't, except for one, his father, Fu Manchu, a Chinese supervillain created by British author Sax Rohmer in the early 1900s. Back in the 70s, Marvel had acquired the rights to use Manchu in their comics and built most of Shang-Chi's arc around him discovering that he was a descendant of evil, grappling with that fact, and eventually putting an end to his bad daddy schemes. Unfortunately, Marvel lost the rights to the character in the ensuing years, meaning that they would have to reacquire them if they wanted to do the exact same story from the comics. But an easy workaround would just be to retcon history a bit and make the Mandarin Shang-Chi's pop. This would allow Marvel to update the character without including some of his more problematic origins. Plus, it would provide a nice bit of continuity between Iron Man and this next wave of Marvel movies, continuing the threads of those stories even with a lot of those OG heroes gone. But what do you folks think? Will the Mandarin show up in Shang-Chi, or could you see him somewhere else in the MCU? And what other long-forgotten characters would you like to see show back up? With Professor Hulk now in play, could Tim Blake Nelson finally get to play the leader? Let's discuss. Thanks for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, and mash that little bell to get notified every time we go live with the show or drop a new video. Also, make sure to check out the final episode of our Game of Thrones after show, All Kings Considered, live this Monday at noon Pacific on Nerdist YouTube and Geek and Sundry's Twitch.